Okay, so I think we're going to start. First of all, thank you guys for all coming to the Bloomfield College Leadership Seminar and Emerging Leaders. I want to welcome you to our new location. In the past, we've done it, I think as most of you know, we've done it in the Student Center, which has worked well, but sometimes is a little bit loud. So we're testing this new location out. So thanks for trekking out and finding out where we're supposed to be. And what we're going to do today is a little different than what we've done in the past, mainly because we've been lucky enough to have Ty on campus before. One of the things that we've tried to do this year that we haven't done the last couple years is that we've tried to build themes around each session and for each speaker. And our session today is going to focus really on leadership and civic engagement. And frankly, out of just about anyone in the state, frankly, I'm going to embarrass you here, but I don't think there's anyone who can speak better to the idea of civic engagement and leadership. Ty Cooper has served as the Chief Domestic Policy Advisor for Mayor Baraka, the Deputy Policy Advisor for Governor Murphy, and now serves in a significant leadership capacity dealing with community engagement and communication, serving as the Vice President for Communication and Engagement and Public Policy for the NJEDA. So to explain all of what that means in the under the umbrella of civic engagement, and perhaps even just answer what civic engagement means to you, I thought we would just simply start off getting right to the point and talk a little bit about what you've done, what you do in those three different roles, and how important civic engagement is in that capacity.
So two things. One, thank you guys for being here on a rainy day. So first, thank you for that. Make sure you guys eat the food. I was always the one in college that would make sure I took every extra water bottle, little brownies back to my dorm, so stock up. And then really want to know who's in the room before I get started. So are there any freshmen here or first years?
Majority.
Hey, first years, sophomores, juniors, seniors that are like, we out the door, we're done with all this. Hi, senior, I see you. So very good. So first, thank you guys so much for coming. I hate microphones, so I apologize if I'm awkward with it. It's just, that's not my skill set, so I apologize. Really glad that Matt and Bloomfield College invited me here today to be part of this program. This is work that I love. This is work that I live by, and the fact that you guys are engaged in leadership so early on is critical. You guys are going to be the ones making the decisions at a future point in time, so it's good to get the strong foundation that you need. Part of that starts with Bloomfield College, and thank you again so much for having me here. It truly is an honor. So he gave a lot of titles,
yes.
And I think titles are so funny because half the time I look at my titles and I'm like, how the hell did I get here? So when you say things like vice president or policy director for a governor or for a mayor, it still manages to like blow me away every single time because it's something I honestly, not the titles, but the work I genuinely love, right? So the bio is there, but born and raised in Newark, like that's where my heart beats. It's what I flow for, is my city, my community, the community of Newark, New Jersey, right? But that extends all throughout the state for the work that I do and get to love. And so things kind of happen by chance. My dad was in politics, worked for Mayor Sharp James for 20 years, and literally he was like, do not, whatever you do under any circumstances, go into politics. So the minute that your parents tell you not to do something, I was like, ooh, I know exactly what I'm gonna do. So to my father's dismay, that's exactly the path that I followed in. So that how you get there steps, how you build the foundation steps for me, really started in undergrad, right? So I was incredibly actively engaged in student government. And I was actively engaged because I didn't see my face represented anywhere. I didn't see my gender represented anywhere. And so for me, it's always been a matter of if not you, then who, if not now, then when. So we've heard that, but while you guys are sitting in these seats, you have the power to make so much change. So part of it, again, was not seeing diversity reflected across the board in any of these spaces in college. When I go into a room, people look at me as though I'm an assistant and not a person walking in as the head of an organization, right? And so the foundation for that really started in undergrad, getting involved in student government, really focusing on programs like this. This, to me, the fact that you guys are here, that there's an early interest in what you're doing, you're already piqued, you're already curious about how you're going to transform not just yourselves, but the community around you, right? So when we talk about civic engagement, that's really how involved are you, how engaged are you in this political process, how engaged are you with your community? And so that beats from, from undergrad level into every other space that I've gone into, because you're one individual person, but as a collective, you guys have the opportunity to transform the nation, right? And I remember people used to say that to me, I was like, oh, you crazy. But it's so true, right? So being actively engaged, participating at early stages, becoming engaged from everything from school board elections to council races to the presidential elections that are coming up, that's really being involved on a civic level, knowing that there's something that's pressing your buttons that you want to see a direct change in, you actively get engaged. How many of you guys are registered in here to vote? What I need to see next time I come is everybody's hand raised. I don't care what political affiliation you're with, that really doesn't matter to me. What I do care about is that you're taking this responsibility so seriously. If you look at other countries and look at how many people don't have the right or access or privilege to vote, or how many of us, we've seen our grandparents that have had to struggle, fight to vote, that's something that you guys cannot take for granted. And as we look at so many of the civil liberties right now that are being hampered or harnessed, part of that is because there aren't people that are as concerned and as engaged as you getting up, registered, and getting out there and voting. So that civic piece, knowing you have the power to change everything from a local election to a presidential election, is serious. I'll go onto my soapbox for that forever, but I saw those hands, so that means next time y'all gotta be registered to vote, because there's a huge election coming up on November the 5th, and then also our presidential next year, which is going to impact so many of us in this room. So you being civically engaged is critical. Not which party, but being actively engaged, finding the issues, that's critical.
So how does someone find those issues? Is it just based on interest? Is it based on, you were talking about your family and their involvement in politics? If you're sitting there sort of in their seats right now, listening to some of the things that you're talking about and aspiring, frankly, to accomplish the things that you've accomplished professionally and also in terms of, helping the community that you love, how does someone start at zero? How do you start at to try to find those passion points and those issues?
So I'm going to pick on the folks that are here, right? So whether it's from the news or even anything that annoys you at this university, are there things that kind of prick your heart? Or things that I'm looking at you right now, so now you gotta say it. Now you gotta tell me your name and you gotta say it. But it's okay, don't be shy. I just talk really fast and really loud. But for anybody in here, if those things that you're focused on, I'd like to hear just some of your concerns as well, because it helps influence us on a policy level. So if you don't mind sharing, it can be anything from the cost of education to, let's make sure that we're legalizing marijuana sooner than later. Like, if these are things, then that's what I'd love to know more about.
Anybody want to chime in?
So you guys are all just here just because you wanted to see my pretty little face? But are there things, like as we're watching globally, things that you guys are concerned about, or even locally, down to your garbage not being picked up, or down to seeing local elections being swayed one way or the other? Are there things like that prick your heart, or knowing that people don't have access to driver's license if they aren't from this country? Are there things like that bother people? Yes.
I'm mostly concerned with climate change because of the fact that there's so much like ice that's melting in the poles, and the fact that if all the ice poles melt, it's going to raise by 230 feet. The only place that's going to be not underwater is like West New Jersey.
Yeah. So to that point, it's one of those huge issues that became a global phenomenon. There was a young woman, Greta, who was 13 at the time, that was protesting, like, we have to pay attention to climate change. This is a real thing. Future generations are going to be impacted. Started as a person of one protesting what was happening in her parliament, and it became a 1 million person global movement. And I'm not saying that all things are going to be like that, but it takes one person having the courage to fight, to say this is an issue, right? To bring it to the table, to bring it to the forefront, and make their voices loud enough and heard. One of the things that you guys have automatic access to is A, through your student government, being able to communicate with your president. B, you guys are in Bloomfield, New Jersey. If there are things that you guys see that as students are impacting, whether it's down to parking or tickets or they have curfews here, these are things that you guys are A, directly impacted by, but how are you also showing that you're impacted, engaged, and willing to make changes, right? So these are the things, while you're here at this point, you can point to and make changes. And so for me, that's how it always started. It's like, all right, so I'm observing my community, I'm observing what's directly impacting me, and it sounds selfish, But that's how people get invested in things. Like if something bothers me to my core, I'm sure it doesn't just bother me, it bothers other people as well. So how do we engage them? The first point of entrance for me was creating this group called Sharp Teens. I recognize there weren't a lot of teens. I'm dating myself. I'm not as young as I look, but when I was working on this campaign, I recognized you guys have all these adults in the room. Everybody's over 18. The youngest person here is 50 or 60, telling me what we need in the city of Newark. That's not right. That's not how you're going to reach the issues that impact kids of my generation. Started an organization, went church to church, door to door, got people registered, and got our ideas and our concerns put on a platform where it was elevated to the point where the mayor at that time recognized us as a formal organization. Politics aside, Democrat, Republican, if there are issues that you are passionate about, creating an interested party or an interested group and bringing those concerns to either legislators or to the local mayor, that's how you get things done. They're more afraid of us than we are of them because there's so much power when you're a voting democracy or a voting public. So again, starting small, going big, finding those that are really interested in the same issues that you are, and building a movement, right? That's incredibly important.
So I also want to dive into a little bit about going back to sort of the development of how these ideas can be generated. You just gave a fantastic example of something that you did at a young age. Also talk to us a little bit about role models and who are some of the role models that you've had. Mm-hmm. Talk to us a little bit about how you went about finding your role models, because I know at the age that most of our audience is in, we're still in the process of learning about ourselves, learning about, as I mentioned before, our passions. Sometimes those things can get generated individually and just within our own heart. But also, you see other people, perhaps there are folks who are out there right now who are looking at you and can be inspired by some of those actions. Who are the kind of people that you were inspired by, but also how do you develop personal relationships with some of those folks?
Right, so for me, I tend to look for people that are a little more quirky, right? So the people that have the big, bold, loud ideas, but they may not get all the traction that they need. People like that to me are incredibly interesting. And then also leaders in this space that I identify with. So in several roles that you mentioned, I was the first woman and the first woman of color in several of those spaces. And so for me, I always look to see what other women of color, what other people of color are in these spaces that I can identify with. And right, I'm never shy. If I see the president of a company or a vice president of a company, I will always go up, I will always introduce myself, give eye contact, and establish a rapport, right? And so this has gotten me several job opportunities, several job offers, but it's identifying what my concerns are, identifying leaders, thought leaders in that space, and it's as simple as a Google. Like, I'm really interested in climate change. Who in New Jersey on the legislature is interested in those issues as well? Identifying who they are. And also through LinkedIn, that's a very powerful tool, don't overlook that. And also just personal interactions, emails. And so a lot of the mentors that I have today, one is Micheline Davis, who I mentioned last time, who's Senior Executive Vice President over the Robert Wood Johnson healthcare system. I didn't even know Black people could do that over there. I didn't know that women were in these positions, and this is when I was an undergrad, but saw her, found her, identified with what she was doing, and every step of the way, she was able to help lift me up, right? And so that's something I fully believe in, having a kitchen cabinet of sorts that is there to protect you, but also there to push back on some of your good and bad ideas. And it's a diverse array. So not just women of color. One of my best friends is this Irish man who gives me all my good feedback, right? But again, having a diverse array of people that are there to support you, so people that are in different industries, but there's still the same passion that you have for what you're doing. So having this cross-section group of folks, and because you guys are here, whether it's your advisor, whether it's your peers, whether it's a senior, whether it's every time there is something that happens around a career day, that you guys are looking for people who have similar characteristics that you're looking for in leadership, right? So these are things you have to do your due diligence, do your own research, and find those same people. But if you look throughout New Jersey, if you look throughout Essex County alone, there are a ton of role models that are here. Our lieutenant governor is right from Essex County, New Jersey, from East Orange, and is incredibly accessible. If you're in the space that I am right now that's really focused on business and industry, these are the spaces I look at, New Jersey Biz, all these other periodicals that show you who's leading in these industries. So you guys have to do the legwork and make sure you know who's at the top of your game that you're looking to get into as well.
Yeah, I want to unpack that a little bit too, because as you know, because you've been kind enough to visit us before, a lot of what this seminar is about development and a lot about finding our own paths. And I think what we often find, regardless of the age, is that often there are roadblocks that get in the way. And I think you just said two really important things that I'd like you to kind of expand on a little bit. First of all, especially when you first started out and you were, as you were mentioning, you were, entering rooms and people didn't realize that you were leading departments and leading divisions. And even before that, as a young woman, when you were in a position where you were looking up to other opportunities and thinking, can an African American woman even be in a place of responsibility to do this kind of work? Those, in my mind, are roadblocks that you have to get through. And I guess the two things that I'd like to get a sense of, and I think the audience would like to get a sense of, is number one, how did you just power through that doubt? And then number two, you were talking about some of your mentors who helped boost you up. What was it about those mentors that specifically helped to boost you up? So I kind of want to take it from the beginning and then all the way to the end, at least. Yeah.
I will just say this, as a woman, and I won't harp on it, but several times you enter a room, people don't look at you as the natural leader. Right, so I remember this was when I was in my 20s and I was appointed as chief of staff for a mayor for a major city. I remember I'm organizing these meetings, I'm talking to the senators at that time, United States senators, congressional members, organizing this huge meeting. I walk in, I'm the only woman that's there, and I remember one of the gentlemen there saying, "Oh, would you mind getting me a cup of coffee, honey?"
Wow.
And I remember that feeling because I'm like, here I am with all my degrees, here I am walking and leading this space, but the first opinion of them was not, okay, hey, boss chick, but it's more so, hey, subservient assistant, and there's nothing wrong with administrative assistant at all. But that wasn't the space or place that I was entering that room in. I had organized it. This was a meeting that they were being invited to on my behalf. And so that's a moment where you either like tuck your head in because it's embarrassing because he said it in front of everybody, or you boss up, right? And so that's one of those times where despite the fact that I was afraid, despite the fact that I was humiliated, I knew if I let it go past that point, this individual would feel free to do it again, and so would anybody else that entered the room. So my response was simple, no, I'm good. You can get my coffee actually, and you can take the notes, we're gonna start the meeting. But it's that quick flip that people have to recognize who you are when you enter a room. There's a woman, what's her name, Ursula Burns from Xerox, and she's the CEO, and she would always say, the reason they knew who I was when I entered a room is because I told them. And so when you enter these spaces, you enter with all that you are, like all of the magnificence and the brilliance and the beauty that's in you, right? And you're gonna get shut down. There are gonna be people that question why you're in the room. That question still happens to this day, and for me it's a matter of knowing who I am, solidifying things whether or not it's in my faith or other, but knowing I have absolutely every right to be in these spaces. So it does happen, but you have to persevere, push through, and recognize like my goal is not about Ty Cooper having a name. My goal is to make sure that no other young girl or man comes into a room and feels like that again, right? So you're correcting other people's behaviors while you're adjusting your own at the same time.
So I gotta ask, I mean, where does that confidence come from? How was it through your?
She get it from my mama. No,
I mean, really, I mean, because that what you're talking about. I mean, I can certainly relate to it in the sense of like I was brought up in the same fashion. You know, if you want something, you go after it. If you want to meet someone, you introduce yourself. But you know, a lot of people don't have that mentality, and they have to build it from scratch. Yeah. And so I guess I want to get a sense for you as a leader within the state. As someone who obviously has deep ties to our region as well, how did that manifest itself as you were growing up, and you know, kind of tying it back to the question as it relates to your mentors perhaps helping you? What were some of the attributes that brought this out of you, or was that just something inherited that you had when you were a kid? I
think we all have to learn it. There are all times when any of us have gone into a room, your knees are shaking, your mouth gets dry, you're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? But I think it's the practice that I've always put in place for myself is never going cold, right? So never go into any room, any meeting, any boardroom where you're not prepared, where you don't have a firm subject matter grasp of all the information that you have to present, where you don't know who's in the room. And so for me, we have like these little dossiers, we'll call them, but files. Like if I know I'm going into a meeting with CEO of this company, let me make sure that I know exactly what his business needs are. Let me make sure that I understand if he's looking for, you know, what profit margins he's looking for, but never go in cold. So that was the first thing. So when I came into a room, the subject matter expertise, like I had that under my belt, right? So always being prepared. It's not a joke. People will look to find ways to discredit you. So you have to walk into these rooms constantly prepared without having a chip on your shoulder because they doubt you, but like just being prepared is the first thing.
And that preparedness builds confidence.
Oh my God,
as well.
yes. It has to, right? So from every speech from every boardroom, from every meeting, from every little 10-second elevator speech that I have with somebody. It's prepared, right? It will always be authentic, but I never want to be caught off guard because that gives a window of opportunity for anybody else to do that. So if you're interviewing for jobs, make sure that you're interviewing with your friends. You're going back and forth, asking those tough questions of each other because you have to be prepared, right? It's so competitive. And I love competition. I'm naturally competitive. Back in the day, I used to play sports, but super competitive, and these are things I think are helpful, right? So as you're preparing for interviews, as you're preparing for mock trial or whatever you're doing in these spaces, that you're prepared, that you've been tried, true, and tested in these spaces over and over again. And don't be afraid of constructive criticism. The best thing that I offer and that I like to receive is constructive criticism of my approach, right? My approach, how I'm entering these spaces, my presentations. So part of it is going in there being prepared. Part of it is also being able to accept constructive criticism when things don't go exactly the way that you want them to. And then also having mentors that are lined up, and you guys have a ton of them. I wish I had taken every resource available while I was in school. I look back, y'all got Starbucks now, but you guys have so many more opportunities available, but just within the academic space, right? Go to all of your professors' hours that they have that are open time, right? Push them as much as they push you, so it's even terrain, right? So get the questions, get the answers that you want from them as well, and seek help at all times, right? So one of the things that you're here, you guys have nothing but time. Seek as much help as you possibly can. Don't be afraid to go to your dean. Don't be afraid to go to your professors or to, it's not the RAs, what do they have now? It's the guidance counselors that are here, or the academic counselors, or your career counselors. Utilize them, use them up. They're getting paid to do this good work for you. Use them while they are here. That is the best networking tool you can also have is through these apparatus as well. So,
yeah, and ultimately what you're talking about is building an infrastructure to support your needs.
Absolutely.
Rather than being on the opposite end where you're just serving those who are around you. We're about the halfway mark, and I definitely want to open it up for questions. But before we do, there are a couple things that I want to get your expertise on. Going to actually the very first question that I asked, I do want to sort of unpack a little bit about what your role and responsibilities have been, both on the state level and the local level. And the reason why I want to make sure that everyone is understanding that is a crucial point of civic engagement as a whole. What you're doing as a policy advisor, what you're doing as a leader and as someone who's engaging various areas of the state. I want to make sure that the students here have an understanding of what civic engagement is really all about, and I frankly don't think there's anyone better suited to talk about the substance of that, both on a state and a local level than yourself and the experiences that you've had. So whether it be specific examples in your your various positions, or whether it be just in general, I think having that perspective would be good. And then have a couple more questions, and then we'll open it up.
Right, so I'm going to reference them through municipal, state, and now in this quasi role that I'm in right now, quasi-government role. So when I was Chief Policy Advisor for Mayor Baraka, one of the things we recognized coming into the city of Newark is that there was a huge disparity in Newarkers that were actually being employed by these amazing anchor institutions. So your Rutgers, your Panasonic, your Prudential, they'd all wear the Newark flag proudly. But one of the most disturbing figures that we found out was that only 18% of Newark residents were actually being employed by these major anchor institutions. And so, of course, my inner tiger comes out, your inner tiger comes out, and I was recognizing there's a policy mismatch, right? So right now you have these major multi-million-dollar organizations that are embedded within the infrastructure of the city of Newark, but Newarkers aren't being given a fair chance. And so the first thing we had to do was bring together all the CEOs, adjust and address the ugly truth of the numbers. Numbers don't lie. People can lie, but numbers do not lie. Address the facts where they were and come up with a really substantive policy solution. So one of the things we came up with was Newark 2020. So you are going to hire 2,020 Newark residents by the year 2020 to decrease the unemployment rate and to increase the number of Newark residents that have attained jobs within the city. It was one of the most terrifying things you have to do because, again, so much is against you, so much negativity and criticism, and the things that people say about my city, there's not enough educated people here, there's not this, there's so many no's. So to me, the no's had to turn into a very powerful yes. So when you're in a meeting with the CEO advocating for Newark residents to get jobs, you come prepared, you come with facts. So when they said, well, there's nobody that's really ready, I said, well, we created this database, and right now we have engineers, we have master's degrees, we have PhDs, we have folks that didn't finish school, but they have all the technical prowess that they need to get into these next spaces. So let's talk about what the real barriers are, right? And so they had to address systemic racism that existed within some of the hiring practices. You have to address how you have to change the algorithm. That's that little ticker. So like if your name is, whatever your name may be, but they see a Newark address, it may automatically cipher you out of that program, right? Or if there's a question about, do you have 10 years experience? Nobody's gonna have 10 years of experience in what it is to be an actuary unless you've actually done it. So again, it's changing not the qualifications, because the Newarkers that we know were ready and willing, but there clearly was a barrier for them getting to the next level. So now we have a digital matching software that basically matches Newark residents that have given us their resumes with positions that are open. So we're trending to hit that 2020 mark by the year 2020. So small thing, recognizing how many Newarkers were unemployed, couldn't get in these corporations, policies shift, acknowledge what's happening, engage residents, make it a participatory thing, bring all the stakeholders to the table. So it wasn't just us and the CEOs, no. We brought Newark residents in. What have been the biggest issues you've had with trying to find a job? Listing those out, being able to course correct where some might need some soft skills, some might need some harder ones, but like, what are the things that we need to do to course correct our actions to make sure that Newarkers who have been here are getting jobs? And so clearly that's well underway. The Mayor Baraka is a light that is doing phenomenal work that truly cares about the community, and I think that's huge. So that's in the city of Newark, right? So we'll pause that there. The second one is when I got to the governor's office, which is huge. I'm really excited to get to go there as Deputy Chief Policy Advisor, and we're engaging in this new work that we haven't done before. One of the things we're focusing on is opportunity zones, right? So this is a federal program where you're investing capital gains into disenfranchised communities. And so it's a lot of words, and I was like, oh, this is a great big word salad, but what does it actually mean? What it meant is that we're encouraging investment in communities that have been redlined out of opportunities. So if you have me at the table deciding which communities are going to receive resources, we have to do this in a very strategic way. Because someplace in Short Hills doesn't need as many resources as someplace in East Orange, Irvington, or Newark. So how are we balancing this out? So that when they say there's $6 trillion worth of capital gains sitting on the sidelines, how do we ensure that's going to be infused into communities that really need it? How do we create infrastructure to support what's needed? So we brought together this interagency task force. So it's myself in the governor's office, the Economic Development Authority, Transportation, Department of Community Affairs. These are huge statewide departments, and they just don't talk. Like, it's crazy. Like, it's like they're mad at each other. They don't talk. So the first thing was bringing these departments together, identifying what the issue is, targeting the communities we need to target, and creating a program that creates pathways for people to have opportunities and access. So whether you're doing development or you're doing small businesses, this is now something that's operational and available in these communities. And so for me, that's a huge thing. In addition, we were also working on the legalization of marijuana. While I was there, affordable housing. So these are all things that we're working on at this very high level, but the recognition is that if you've never been without, you'll never know what it is to need affordable housing. If you don't have a relative who's been locked up or had an issue because they were smoking marijuana, you don't understand why the social justice component of this legislation is just as critical as the monetary one, right? So these are things that we're bringing people together at a collective impact table to strategize around why your opinion is different than mine. Okay, we may not agree on everything, let's get to a middle ground, right? And so these are things that are impacting us as a state right now. These are things that we're working on right now as a state. In my current capacity at EDA is the economic engine for the state of New Jersey, right? So all the big developments, even the old Xanadu, what is that one?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that new project where they have the Universal Studios, there's like a roller coaster, a slide and all that. That's part of what we help to foster through economic development. Not the best one to highlight. But again, like, we are the major economic engine, so billions of dollars pumped through this agency. The new CEO we have and the new governor that we have recognized immediately, we're pumping resources into communities, but where is the mismatch? Why are we still seeing such huge racial wage gaps, such huge gender wage gaps? How can we address these issues? And so from the point we got there, it was creating an economic development plan that is addressing these issues, investing in people, investing in communities, not just doing development to people, but doing it with communities, bringing people to the table. Because if you do it any other way, you're gonna have all these abandoned buildings that don't get populated because people have not been part of the process. And so it's pivoting what we're doing. One of the exciting things I did, and I'm gonna brag about this because it's such a huge deal. I didn't know anything about tech, venture capital, any of these things. This is such a money business. I had no idea, so now I am researching everything. But one of the immediate things I recognized when I was appointed as VP of this company, first of all, I was the first and only Black woman to ever serve, the first person of color to ever serve as a vice president within the Economic Development Authority. And that's an issue, right? So this is an organization that's been around for decades, and to be the first woman of color to be there, first of all, if I'm the only, then that's not good enough. That's so whack to me. Like, if you're the only one there, what are you actually doing? It's an ego trip, but it's nothing good for anybody else. So first of all, create pipelines of leadership to ensure that different folks have access to the table. If I'm there by myself, there's nothing I'm gonna do that's gonna be beneficial. That's why, like, that doesn't make sense to me. So one of the first things I recognize in the space of venture capital, there's millions of dollars flowing into technology companies that are focused on bioscience, life science, things that I never heard about and didn't, but that's not my specialty area. One of the things I immediately heard from the community though was that, okay, they're not really investing in small businesses, micro businesses, women businesses, people of color businesses, like where is the disconnect? And then I was also talking to the founders who were saying, well, listen, we invest in people who look like us. They're being honest. Yeah. But if there's a disconnect between people that have amazing startups and just don't have the opportunity because of a zip code, let's put that on its head, right? Like let's change that entire theory. So we just had the first diversity and inclusion founders and funders roundtable. So we had major state agencies come in, my CEO and president came in, we had the chief diversity officer that also came in. But the point was looking at small businesses that were headed by communities of color, people of color that just had not had access to capital, right? So you've got a great idea, your idea is better than so-and-so's, but you don't have a $2 million check from your dad's friend to invest in your company. Acknowledge that there's an issue and acknowledge that part of it is a racial barrier that's there. Acknowledge that we don't have the same access to capital and put that on its head. So the end result from that was meeting with founders of amazing startups, meeting with funders who were looking at companies to invest, acknowledging what the differences were, and coming to a point where we're going to create a pipeline of money just to invest in minority and women-owned businesses, right? So these are things that are happening that we are changing immediately because there's an issue, right? And if we don't acknowledge it, if we don't change it, that issue will be longstanding. So when you want to have a business or you want to have a business, you now have access and resources to funds. So these are the small policy shifts that we're making, and they sound small, but the monumental change that they can have on communities is so impactful. And part of it was, I'm not an expert in all these spaces, but what I can quickly do is go in, identify a problem, and look for a solution. Be very solution-oriented, and also know that it's not just me, it's not just my words. I'm also reaching out to small business owners who didn't have access to capital. Where is the disconnect? Talking to them, right? Engaging them into the process. And then the most ironic thing, bringing them together with funders. How crazy is that? It seems like such an easy thing, but it's something that in government I feel like we don't do because there's so much bureaucracy at play. But I will say having this governor and Tim leading EDA, it's something that is changing and has to and needed to change.
Yeah, and I think for those taking notes or listening, I mean, I want to bring it back to the very beginning of what Ty was talking to us about. I mean, number one, we've just heard 3 amazing examples, both of what civic engagement means on a local level, on a municipality level, and also on a state level. So that's number one. But number 2, I also think it goes back to your original point, which was, what issues matter to you?
Yeah.
What issues are out there that you want to get involved in? And for those of us who are trying to define or understand what civic engagement is about, it really comes from what's out there and where your interests are. I will bet just about everything that you just talked about, whether it be on the local level, state level, the citywide level, municipality level, those came from your passion points as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I'm a girl from a city. I'm always going to believe and hope that cities do well. And I think this piece around social engagement, civic engagement, or social responsibility, civic engagement, really, you're looking at yourself as an individual and how can the work that you're doing impact so many others in your community and take it further from your community to the state, to the nation, to the globe. Like, you have the capacity to be dynamic change agents. But one, it's being actively engaged, taking that first step, and recognizing your own responsibility as a member of society, right? Like, we're all here to contribute back to society. You can get wealthy, that's really cool, that's actually really cool. But more importantly, how are we giving back so that the future for your brother, your niece, your nephew, your daughters, your sons is that much better, right? So you take the eye out of it completely and make it a much bigger focus.
So with that in mind, before we open up to questions, I want to, since we're talking about a variety of issues and issues that matter to New Jersey, talk to us about some of the issues that you haven't yet worked on. What are some of the issues that are out there that are going to percolate up in the next, let's just say the next political cycle, things that we need to be mindful of, things that perhaps some of those in our audience might even want to get involved in, and more importantly, things that we haven't really touched on. Just give us an insider's view of like what's going to be a big deal in the state of New Jersey in the next year or two.
So I say for us, incentives is always going to be really big. That's a huge part of how our organization is funded. And right now it's sitting in a political limbo, but I believe in the good people of this state, the good legislature in this state to get positive results done for our incentives. We talk about
Just define what that means for those of us who.
So that's a really complex issue, right? So right now we have a series of tax incentives, which previously were known as ERG and GROW. We didn't have caps on them, meaning that there was just money that was being put out the door, but there wasn't a reasonable cap on them. So we're transitioning these new programs into programs that focus on place-based strategies. So people are coming and saying, hey, I'm bringing this huge corporation here, and we're gonna have 50,000 jobs, but we need this much money. Okay, if you're gonna have that many jobs, prove it. Prove it. Simple. Prove it. Prove that you're going to hire from local communities. Prove that you're going to get this work done, and prove that you're going to stay here, right? So prove it. And if we cap the amount of money that we're actually, or tax credits that we're actually releasing out the door, that makes people focus on things a lot more strategically. And I think, again, focusing on particular communities, being hyper-focused, focusing on a place-based strategy, I think is going to clearly change the trajectory of the work that we're doing. So that's one piece. The second piece is focusing on affordable college education. It's going to be clearly important for us, getting micro businesses and micro loans together. So again, as we're reaching into these communities which have particular niches, that we're acknowledging the cultural differences that are there, and also making sure that we're pulling the best ideas for businesses out there. So micro loans is always going to be a big one for us. And then the ongoing battle with the legalization of marijuana to be continued. But it's one of those things where I think it's such a healthy dialogue and argument that's happening around social justice versus the monetary return. And so these are things that are critical to our society, critical to our budget, but more so there's that social component. And then also, which is always in the back of my mind, is the intersection of economic development, workforce development, and corrections, right? So if we're focusing on economic development, bringing large-scale corporations in here, what do we have to do to ensure that the employee base is ready, that employers are happy and ready to go, to make sure that when you guys come out, you guys can get jobs in these really great corporations who are focused on the state of New Jersey, right? So there's
Yeah, and I mean, we can unpack that maybe during the Q&A if there's interest, but ultimately you have someone like Ty who's frankly fighting for all you guys, because when we're talking about, when we talk about job training, when we're talking about ensuring that the investment, the tax breaks that we're providing with companies is actually going to jobs, to people such as yourself and to people in New Jersey. I mean, these are really important civic engagement type issues, which, I think we really appreciate Ty's perspective, not just showcasing them, but also really explaining them. We got about 15 minutes of some questions. I have a couple more that I may try to squeeze in, but what we're going to do, Ty, we're going to switch microphones. I'm going to give this to you, and then we're going to.
Don't trip, I will laugh.
All right, yeah, I know. And I think we have a first question over here. Just guys, do me a favor. Just pass the mic around to the next question.
Hello.
You guys say your name, your grade, all that good stuff. Where you from?
I'm a senior, Desmond Mitchell from Camden, New Jersey.
Okay.
The resources in my city is very scarce and it's very poverty-stricken, violence. Yeah. And I was wondering, I go back and I check on, I want to open this community center. So I was wondering, what are the steps that we would be able to take to help the kids into programs for technology, things to get them up on a higher scale. I went to Hoboken and there's scooters out there. It's all it's like a slap in the face. So it's what can we do to get our resources on that level to expand the youth's mind on that capacity?
I think that's an excellent question. One, I think there's been serial disinvestment in Camden for decades, and it is abominable what has happened there. One of the things that we're trying to focus on right now is just focusing on food deserts, right? So if you don't have access to fresh and healthy food, you can't play, you don't want to go to a community center, but realizing that within the city of Camden, there's not one single grocery store, right? So there's 6 grocery stores in the next half a mile. There's 6 grocery stores in all the suburban areas. But what does that say about our community? What does that say about the inability for the market to understand that we need to have resources and access to fresh produce? That leans into everything else. I think with Camden, one of the things we're working closely with the mayor now, with Mayor Moran, to identify workforce challenge issues. And then also kind of a holistic wraparound approach for that, because it's that frustrating, sensitive topic of how many incentives have been placed in Camden, but how many are actually reaching the community, right? And so I think for us that is critical, and this is one of these things that we could figure out a way to have a community benefit agreement with a developer to bring forth a community center, that's one way. If you start having meetings with the mayor or with your council person saying, listen, these are some issues that we can truly change. If you guys have this space or this piece of land that's owned by the city but is being underutilized, how can I use this space given to you guys in kind, give me the space in kind, and develop a program that we can put within the city, right? So you have to also come prepared. If you're gonna do a community center, what's it doing from the hours of 8 and 10 or 8 and 5? Like during those time period, what is it going to use? And then can you get resources from the city and the state to support what you're doing? If it's got a, an active component for it or a healthy lifestyle component, that's things that we can also bring the philanthropic community in. But like get that entire proposal for what you're committing to with the community center, because that could be a ton of things. And then we can lean on spaces like P-Tech that they have now in Newark and other areas, where again they're getting tech classes for them as well. And if this whole thing with the digital divide is that big, how are we reaching back to our communities to make sure that they have all the resources they need? But the fact that you're interested, I'm gonna make sure we talk afterwards, because the mayor, we have a good rapport with the mayor in his office. But you're the voice they need to hear. Some of the stuff that they're doing is antiquated because they just don't know. But when they have people like you going to school, making a difference and wanting to, I will run the mile for you, whatever I could do to help with that.
Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Who else do we have? Come on, guys.
I'm gonna start picking on y'all then. So in the blue shirt in the front, why are you part of this leadership program? What brought you here? You gotta give me your name and your grade. Yeah, right there, see?
My name is Jason Villapin. I'm a freshman, and I'm from Northbury, New Jersey.
Pleasure to meet you.
I'm stuck right now. I mean, I grew up in New York City, but then I moved to Northbury. My final 2 years of high school, and I know there's a lot of corruption.
Mm-hmm.
If you know Amir, I forgot the mayor name, but I don't like him that much. But it's very corrupt. They're talking about power plants. The pollution would be terrible for the town, and the things he does is just he doesn't even live in the town itself.
So these are things, as a person who lives in the community, you can bring to the council members as well. You bring to your committee, your committee members there as well, but really starting with council, but bringing this issue to light. If it's something that you acknowledge, so do other people. But the fact that you acknowledge it, now you gotta do something.
And what would I do? I mean, the process.
So when I wouldn't call it outright political corruption to their face just yet, do a little bit more research to find out what they were going to do with the power plant. Find your local environmental groups to see anybody from Sierra Club on down. If there is a particular issue that you guys can focus on, but make it a calling card for yours. Ask them what they were planning to do. Where was the community involvement in that area as well?
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome. So I see you in the front. I'm gonna ask you. And tell me your name and then why you're here.
So you got?
Yep, it's the me.
Alright, my name is Alexa Schmidt. I'm a freshman and I am not from New Jersey. I'm from Honolulu, Hawaii.
I'll trade vacation.
Yeah, I mean, I'd really what advice would you give for someone who maybe doesn't know much about what's happening in their community but wants to get more involved and try to be a bigger change for the future generation moving forward?
So I love that, and I love that you're asking those type of questions so early on. One is just doing your own research, right? I know it sounds so frustrating, but before you go out there, what are your political viewpoints? What are your passion points? What are the things that stick out to you? So identifying what those things are that move for you, that move your spirit and move your heart, that's the first way to get involved. And then secondly is looking at the local organizations that already exist, and if you find a gap for what you want to do, creating your own. That's the best thing. I mean, from social media campaigns to having in-person meetings, it's finding that group, finding your niche, finding your passion, and really acting on it, right? So it's this engagement piece, which is the most nerve-wracking, where you have to actually engage. It's not just watching from the sidelines, but it's you being an active participant in what's happening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I see you've been copiously taking notes, so I gotta know your name and why you're interested. I would do this around everybody, but since you're in the front, go ahead.
My name is Avidish. I'm a freshman, and I'm really interested in learning more about immigration and how to help immigrants succeed.
I love this. So I would say a couple things. Locally, I know within the city of Newark, they have this municipal ID program, which they've been using as part of a way to access communities with immigrant populations to make sure that we're getting all the assistance that they do need. But bigger than that is also the census, which is becoming a really critical issue that exists right now. But within most municipalities, they do have, I know we had a deputy mayor of global affairs in the city of Newark. I'm not sure what the equivalent would be here, but a better space to start for an interest like that would be going on a federal level, right? So you've got Senator Booker, Senator Menendez, who are doing deep dives in this work. They're always looking for interns. They're always looking for people to do research for them. Locally here, I think your congressional member is Albio Sears or Don Payne.
And a little bit of Mikey, I think.
Right, and a little bit of Mikey Sherrill. But there's on a federal level, there's ways to get directly and immediately involved. Never look an internship, a fellowship, like never look at that as a negative thing. That is the best point of entry for you to get into these spaces, to understand the subject matter really importantly, and to have connections there as well. So I would say federal level is critically important on this one, and you've got local folks that are also advocating on these issues, but really the congressional federal ways is a really good space to go to from there.
Thank you.
One quick question on my end, which I really wanted to ask, is as it relates to internships that you were just talking about and maybe first jobs. I believe your first job was with Senator Lautenberg, is that correct?
So right out of undergrad, I knew nothing about working for a United States senator, but I knew there were issues that he cared about. He was the senator that was the first one that stopped smoking on planes. So before y'all were probably born, you were allowed to smoke on the plane, which is disgusting if you think about that now. Like people smoking on an airplane, this closed area. That's ridiculous, right? So I knew that there were issues that he cared about that were really important to me. Not just that, during the Whitman years when there was an influx of young black males that were being tailed on the highways, the senator put forth legislation specifically to address these discrepancies. And so for me, here is this amazing Jewish senator, but he's speaking to issues that are really important to me. And so not only did I get to work there and literally sold myself that day, and there were 100 other people that applied for that position, but I did what I talked about earlier. I came in prepared. I knew the issue areas that were important to him. I did my research before I came in and became a valuable part of that team and part of that community. But really it's just being prepared and not being afraid to fail and not being afraid to ask for that big ostentatious job that you want, right? So part of it is like get your foot in the door, don't be afraid, because people have a really hard time saying no, right? They do.
What kind of advice would you give yourself now that you've done so much since those days? I mean, what kind of things either do you laugh about now or wish you knew when you were aspiring and just starting in Senator Lautenberg's office?
Go harder, stay longer, come earlier, like all those things, like go 10 times, like I appreciate the level of success I've had in these spaces via titles, but that's not the work, right? So hindsight, if I could go back, it really is that I would have researched more, been there earlier, stayed later, volunteered for more, not at the expense of my schooling, clearly, but I would have leaned all the way into those spaces, especially for internships over the summer where you have nothing else to do, because those often turn into really substantive jobs. And then also, it's okay to doubt yourself every now and again, like give yourself permission to know that you can fail, to know that things are not always gonna work out the right way, but bounce right back up. Like you can't let these little things get you down so badly so you don't bounce back up, right?
That's great advice for all of us, because those are the things that you can actually control, right?
Yeah.
So we're up to our hour, so I think what we're going to do is just, Ty's will be gracious enough. I know that there's a couple of folks that she wants to follow up with per our Q&A, but also in addition, if there are any questions or if anyone wants to just introduce themselves to Ty directly, as she would probably advise you all to do, please do. And we're lucky to have Ty here, and again, this is the second time she's come to the seminar class. This is the second time we've had her on campus. She's been a great friend of Bloomfield College and a great servant and a great civil servant to our area. So we're grateful to have her here. We're grateful for her expertise and her values, and she's a great example.
Can I just say this too? So at the Economic Development Authority, we are hiring for interns throughout the year. We pay really well. You get good experience in economic development, community development, and so these are things, if you're interested in that space, or even understanding more so about venture capital, which is my new thing now. I love being able to know more about money. But then definitely make sure that you come up to me. And then also the other hat I didn't talk about was communications, right? So one piece of what I do is the policy, but if that's not being communicated or the narrative is not owned by you, it'll end up destroying the organization as a whole. So being able to communicate effectively, having an apparatus built around you to cultivate messaging is critically important for any agency that I've worked for as well. So
Indeed.
yes, that's it.
All right. Well, we will wrap things up, but like I said, Ty will be gracious with your time and stick around for a little bit longer. So please feel free to utilize that time with her one-on-one. Thank you so much, Ty.
Thanks, guys.